Hello, and welcome back to JLXP, episode 80. And it's been a bit. The last episode I did was the night after Cloud9 won LCS Summer 2022. And then I also talked about Worlds Draw and Worlds Format and have basically been dark since then, relaxing a bit and also prepping for Worlds. And I think there's been a lot of Worlds coverage already that's very good that I'm sure many of you have already seen. Top 5 each role lists, Worlds tier lists. K-Drill did one. There's been lots of really good Champions Queue streams to see all the players arriving and competing against each other. And I just wanted to make this video kind of the night before Worlds, as play-in's going to be starting tomorrow. And I jotted down just somewhat scattered thoughts. I have 11 of them. I realized it was 11 right before I hit record, so it says 10 thoughts because that's the spirit of the video, but it's going to be 11 and possibly more thoughts of what's going to happen at the World Championship, just to hopefully get people a little bit more excited and let people know kind of the things that I'm thinking about aside from straight up Worlds favorites or straight up Worlds tier lists or top 20 rankings. So without further ado, I'm just going to get into the video and start talking about the stuff that is interesting to me. So point one is the support meta is going to be very different. And what I mean by this is when you look across the globe in playoffs and regional qualifiers patches, there was so much Yuumi Lulu and a little bit of Nami, but we've seen that most of the year. Specifically, that is just the enchanters that enable a hypercarry. I think Champions Queue is a pretty good place to look to gauge roughly what the big champions are going to be. And there have been also 3 patches worth of changes from when NA playoffs happened to what's happening at Worlds. Over 30 champions have been changed, and many of them are nerfs to whatever the most popular champion in that role is. But I think the reason the support meta one is so important is I think it's somewhat fundamentally different playing an enchanter versus playing a melee engaged tank. And the teams that were best at playing enchanters are the top seeds from almost every region because it was so dominant. But when I watch Champions Queue, it's almost exclusively engagers, which I think is going to definitely change the power rankings of teams going in. And I'll continue here. Point number 2 is that the AD meta is also different. And this is just a natural progression from the supports Yuumi and Lulu being taken out. It could also be Yuumi and Lulu are taken out in part because Sivir and Zeri are nerfed. But literally everything that was big was nerfed. And to me, the most dominant parts of the meta were the support in AD. And teams that could play around and enable their bot lane the most were generally the best teams. And I think that's going to be different. Zeri got mega nerfed. I'm seeing more Ezreal, more Kai'Sa. It's a lot of unknowns, which is exciting, but it also means that I think AD will have less influence now at Worlds than it did in qualifying for the Worlds Championship. Because I think the level of hypercarry that we saw from the Sivir Zeri meta was nearing the power of Arden Sensor AD carries back in 2017 in terms of how much it impacted the game. So that's point 1 and 2 in support and AD meta. The third is that the top meta in terms of let's play around the top laner and let's accelerate the game through top lane could actually be the likely strategy, which is going to be such a big flip because if you're more likely to be playing melee supports, you're less likely to be able to protect your hypercarry, and you're also enabling your support to be able to move more frequently, and the most accessible lane for that support to have a large impact is top lane. It's also the best way to secure Rift Herald and start to accelerate early games. But it's going to be super interesting to me because in the post-durability patch world, where the changes started getting walked back a little bit in terms of trying to accelerate the game because the durability changes made the game a little bit too slow, dragons were increased in power, Rift Herald was increased in power, and Dragon Souls in comparison, were also increased in power because the cumulative strength of the dragon was increased Cloud Soul specifically, so all dragons can be, game winning. So honestly, this is a bit of a meandering point because I don't exactly know what's going to happen, but I do know the top lane is going to be more important at Worlds than it was during the Summer Split playoffs. And if teams prioritize top lane and the other team is prioritizing dragons, I think that would end up actually increasing the length of games, because I don't know if just the gold lead is enough to actually overpower teams that have started to early stack dragons. It's going to be enough to stop them from getting a soul. But when one team gets multiple dragons and the other team has a very strong top side, that elongates the games. And we could actually see an increase in average game time from summer playoffs to the World Championship. Probably not during the play-in phase, because usually the regional strength and the mismatch in team strength will just create faster games. But when we get to the group stage and maybe the knockout stage, I think games could actually end up being a decent bit longer. So with all that being said, point number 4 is that I don't think summer playoffs will be highly predictive of world success. And this calls back to the things I just said about the equation that you needed to solve to be the number one team in your region. I think is just a much different equation than what it takes to win Worlds. Mainly the support AD portion, but more so the knock-on effects that has on the rest of the team. Like, if the general thoughts on the meta that I have here turn out to be correct, the control mage mid that set up team fights and bought space for the AD carry will be more likely to be effective if you're Galio or Talia or Twisted Fate, where you're moving around the map and playing to side lanes. So Genji, absolutely hyper-dominant team in Korea. They're still going to be extremely, extremely good. But if you take their relative power from the end of Summer Split playoffs, where they swept T1, I have to lower it. Because, Ruler could completely dominate games to a higher level than he's going to be able to dominate them at this World Championship. I still think they definitely have a chance to win. But if you think, the World Championship that Ruler won was that Ardent Sensor World Championship when AD Carry could have the most impact. So they would move down a little bit to me. This also... Sorry, one sec, more water. This also moves up teams like T1 and RNG. So teams that had across the year generally high levels of success, I'm expecting high levels of success from at the World Championship. More so than teams that peaked right at the end. Because the year overall saw far more diverse metas, which is the best I can do to be predictive of the world's meta, is just take an average of what happened this year, just because I think the amount of change between the end of the summer split and the World Championship is larger than it's been in a couple of years for sure. So that means the MSI champion, who also happened to go 13-3 in the summer split regular season and then just lost best of fives to EDG in the summer playoffs and in the regional qualifier, and then didn't lose any other best of fives the whole year and had an overall best of 3 record of 27-7. RNG is insanely good and should actually be, in my opinion, in the conversation for world championship contenders. Yet they're kind of seen as, obviously, this loaded play-in team, but the 4th LPL seed. That's the easy Chinese team. No, it's not. No. I do not think so whatsoever. All right, number 5. Changing gears a little bit to more narrative beats. The NA versus EU rivalry. Did you know that North America actually had a better Worlds than EU in 2021? You wouldn't think that because of, MSI and G2 beating EG 6 times in a row. But in the 2021 World Championship, group stage overall performance for the region, LEC was 6-12, NA was 8-10. It is a very easy counter to just say if Fnatic had upset, that would be different, but it was extremely close last year. Europe had one of their worst years Actually, in terms of wins, that was their worst year since 2016, when they also went a cumulative 6-12. Any of the past 5 years had also been better than that. So they definitely need to find a way to step up. And NA actually had a decent year from a win-loss perspective. Cloud9 was 2-4, 100 Thieves was 3-3, and Team Liquid was also 3-3 for an overall record of 8-10. So even though I don't think anyone is wrong to put EU above NA, I will continue to reiterate that the process with which teams are judged of a pass-fail out of group stage, not out of group stage, with that cutoff usually being roughly above 50%, it makes the gap between EU and NA seem larger than it actually is. Because I have everywhere from 2014 to 2021, so 8 years worth of group stage results, total win-loss. EU is at 48.6% and NA is at 42.3%. Definitely a difference, but not nearly as big as you would think when you consider that first place is Korea at 77%. So they're basically 30% higher win rate than LEC, whereas NA's gap is 6% below what the LEC is. So be very attuned to the NA versus EU rivalry, because I really do believe that anything can happen in those games. Speaking of which, Cloud9, the best NA team, and a very smart team that might be able to adjust, the summer meta fit them so damn well. And I am concerned about their ability to mold into whatever it is we have now. Sven is a grinder. I've seen him play in Nautilus all over the place in Champions Queue. But it is just so much different than his support is so easy man interview, where he can just play Yuumi Lulu, press E on Berserker and Blabber and win. He has to do such a more complete support job with those champions being out of the way. And then also, Jensen's strength is definitely laning phase on control mage picks. And if it switches into a Galio Silas type game, that is not as strong as he is on LeBlanc, Orianna, Azir, etc. So some concern, especially consider how hard their group is and how well the meta fit them. And that's where we anchor their strength at. Whereas now I don't think their fit as good as it was in the summer. Speaking of the rivalry, though, Mad Lions, a play-in team that many people... I've stopped numbering these. I'm sorry. This is number 7. Mad Lions. They didn't win a best of 5. It wasn't a good look. But I think they're going to be really good if they're not just completely demoralized and mental boomed from everyone saying they don't deserve to be there. Because I just feel like Kaiser wasn't a strong performer on those enchanters. And he's a really good support, playmaker, and engager. And Niski was MVP for a reason. You can make arguments that they might not deserve 4/5 of the LEC All-Pro first team, but they actually did get 4/5 of the LEC All-Pro first team. So they were really effective for the majority of the year. I think didn't fit the patch. And they're going to be fearsome. Nobody, I think they're probably going to be making groups. So whoever is second in that play-in Group A is likely going to have to play against Mad Lions, or hell, even DRX could fall to third in Group B of play-in if Mad Lions wins a single best of 1 against them. So next point number 8, the play-in format is extremely punishing, especially for the play-in regions. They're just not meant to make it to group stage anymore. In the past, I feel like the number of slots from the play-in, well, hell, let's go further back. When it wasn't even a part of Worlds and it was just the international wildcard tournament, no major regions were invited. They only played amongst themselves. So there was a guarantee that some of them would get group stage exposure. That's gone now because there are 4 slots available and 5 major region teams are a part of the play-in tournament. 2 from EU, 1 from NA, 1 from China, 1 from Korea. So they're kind of screwed. Like they have to play so far above their historical level to even make it to the group stage. Not only is it punishing for them, it just makes it kind of punishing for everyone because the expectation for the major region teams is that they make it through, and the drama is actually more about whether or not one of them doesn't make it through. Take your pick of who it's going to be. But yeah, heart goes out to the play-in regions. They have an absolutely massive task to compete in this best of 1 round robin, immediately slotting into some best of 5s. On that, point number 9, RNG is the strongest 4th seed in the history of Worlds. And I can say that with a lot of confidence. The previous 4th seeds in Worlds, 2020, we had Mad Lions. They didn't make it out of play-in. We had LGD, which was kind of a funny story because having attended 2020 Worlds with Team Liquid, the quarantine phase was not easy. This was the height of COVID, and hundreds of people descended upon China. 14-day mandatory hotel quarantine. The computers were not that good at the time. I'm sure you kind of saw some pictures, but there was this one little circular desk when you're in your hotel room on your own. Like, Core JJ actually he stacked up, I can't really do the visual here, but he basically stacked up a bunch of cases of soda to extend his desk so he had the correct surface for his arm to rest while he was using his mouse. And this is the situation that like every single team had to spend 14 days in play-in, scrimming in that environment, playing either Korean or Chinese solo queue in that environment, which was a little intermittent with your ability to access this or even the performance of the tourney realm. Like, dude, it was pretty rough for almost every team that is practicing, which not many people complained about it because there were so many constraints with COVID in China of what you could actually get in those rooms in the first place. So you could tell everyone was doing absolutely their best to make it happen. But then you just have LGD sitting over here who doesn't have to quarantine at all. And I'm thinking, man, they're going to demolish people in play-in, but they really didn't. So that was the cherry on top of how weird it was that they performed so poorly at that World Championship when other teams spent 14 days in this hotel quarantine. And for us, the next day, we played our stage game once we were out of quarantine. Some teams got out the day that they had to go on stage to play. Like, it was crazy, the adversity that teams had to face at the 2020 World Championship. And the next point here is actually kind of related to this. The scrims in Champion Queue are very weird. I don't know if they're as weird as they would have been for 2020 Worlds in China, but it's just very challenging for teams to have the right level of scrims or solo queue or champ queue ping. Because if you think about the pre-COVID world, there was usually many teams would just all go to Korea and you scrim there for a couple weeks and then you travel to the world's location. There was also a year where, I think it was the European year, where like NA teams went to EU, did their own little like pseudo boot camp there with the 8 or so Western teams. And then the Chinese teams would all kind of stay in their respective low ping regions and scrim against each other in China. It's so scattered now. Like, for one, because the world stages are so geographically different, Mexico City versus New York are so far apart. The group stage teams, which are like just getting in now, not all of them, to New York, are like 70 ping to Mexico City. So not only is it hard to play Champions Queue at even level, it's really hard to scrim. And it would be even harder to like scrim before you go over. So in previous years, it was usually everyone in relatively the same location. Now it is just so spread out. And then you also have complications like what has happened with Fnatic, where Upset and Hilly tested positive for COVID and are like late to play in. At the time of recording this, Fnatic made an announcement that Upset will be able to play in their super important game they have against EG, but Hilly won't be able to play until like the next day because he tested negative at like a slightly later date and couldn't get on the same flight. Like, so difficult. Okay, wrapping this up. The final thought number 11. Korea is still better than China at Worlds in terms of win rate. So they haven't had the championship team since Damwon in 2020. But listen to these numbers. So I have next to me the cumulative group stage results from 2014 to 2021. Korea is 116 wins and 34 losses, a win rate of 77%. The LPL is 90 and 60, a win rate of 60%. Not even close. Last year, they were 13 and 11. LCK was 18 and 6. Both of them had 4 teams in group stage. China only advanced 2 last year. Korea, all 4. In fact, the only team since 2014 to not make it out of group stage for Korea was 2018 Gen G. That's the only team in 8 years. China's had 18 of 25 teams get through. Still a very high rate, but that is not 96%, which is what the LCK has. They have just been so dialed in terms of their ability to win best of ones and advance to later stages of the tournament. They haven't had necessarily the right play style to beat the very best LPL teams in best of fives or G2 in best of fives, which definitely happened a little bit. But yeah, do not sleep on Korea, especially early in the tournament. And I'm actually guilty of this because when I do my own tier lists, I'm like, oh yeah, Gen G, SKT, and then like all of the LPL. Like they just feel so overwhelmingly strong. But that's a feeling that we actually get a lot for the LPL. But their hit rate is just not nearly as consistent as the LCK teams. So that's going to be a little side thing that I try and track throughout the World Championship. Anyway, it's not that long until World starts, actually. It's 7:41 p.m. at time of recording this. I believe Pacific time. I believe the first game starts at 1 p.m. Pacific time. So we're like 18 hours away. I really should have done this video sooner, but better late than never, right? Anyways, thank you once again for watching. Schedule for Worlds. The days are really long. So, like, I am working analyst desk tomorrow for day 1 of play-in. I will try to do a podcast afterwards, like I did at MSI, but I can't commit to doing daily uploads just depending on my fatigue level and the schedule that I have to keep. I would say very high likelihood on days that I'm not on the desk that I'll do a podcast because I'm definitely going to be watching and it's going to give me a little bit more time to be able to deliver a good one at the end of the day. So keep an eye out for that. I'm going to be releasing a lot of content throughout the World Championship. Hope you enjoyed 11-ish thoughts on 2022 Worlds, and I will see you next time.